Hey there, guys. So, I hope you're all okay. I hope you're, in control of your situation to the extent that that's possible at the moment. I thought that I should, maybe long overdue, I have no idea really, um, talk about who I am a bit more. It's kind of weird and awkward, but you will understand that, I suppose. And it will be, to me at least, it will be like I'm actually there in the room with you much more now than before. Because I realized that I don't normally do this. I tend to, on my channel, talk about things that I have some type of experience with, in the assumption that what I am doing is sharing some type of knowledge, some type of, things that I've come in contact with, which may be interesting to people out there, which is how I do things, which is how I look at the world or at people, right? So I'm trying to sort of broaden this this side of things, this side of my channel a bit more, in the hopes of, I don't know, becoming maybe as a person a bit more accessible or a bit more easy to relate to, in things like that. There's also lots of reasons which will become apparent in my story why this is awkward for me, why I have to make such a big deal of this. Then again, there's lots of people out there who do a kind of a who am I kind of a video on their channel at one time or another, right? So I suppose that's all okay. So my name is Eline. I am Dutch national. I was born in the Netherlands in 1966, so that's quite a long while ago. Hence the discolored hair. I like it though. It's nice. This bit here is not. It's from a bottle, but this is what's coming out of my head nowadays. Sorry for the lighting. The sun is in and out, so there's clouds in front of the sun now and again, and then we don't. It has to readjust and all that. So we'll just have to. It will just have to do. My name is Eline. I am the child of divorced parents. Point one. That happened in the 70s. That was a dramatic phase in my life. Then again, I suppose that why I am also on YouTube is because I've had a combination of sort of psychotherapeutic experiences that are really important to me, and or witchy and energy work type experiences, which is a very different stage or state of affairs for me to be engaged in. I could say, I suppose, that I have gotten back a sense of personal sovereignty, yes, from working with energy and magic in a way that I didn't used to have. I had basically, when I came onto this planet, I had no chance in hell, like many other people, right? It's the thing I have. The other thing is that I'm also quite lucky. I tend to be lucky. I tend to share luck with other people as well in ways that I can't really explain. So that kind of compensates to a large extent, yes, for not having a chance in hell, which is a really weird combo. Why should. Then again, maybe all this is really normal and ordinary, and lots more people, are born with lots of disadvantages, certainly. And the secret, or part of the secret to having a life, whatever that means for us, whatever that means for each one of us individually, a part of the secret is to allow yourself or make yourself focus on the lucky bits, the if possible, if there's a way there's always, in my opinion or in my perspective, there's always a way that you are blessed, I suppose, or there's a talent you have, or there's a secret to you that you have to sort of manage to open up, and life is about that, really. So I've got lots of, those little approaches, which often I am not aware of at all, because a lot of the past for me is a very dark country. The more I At the moment, today is the 30th of April 2020. It's a Thursday where I am. And I suppose it's a Thursday everywhere else. I have no idea, really, whether it's a Thursday, the 30th of April in Australia at the moment. That's be silly. I'm not making sense, am I? The past is something that comes back to me also. Maybe it happens for other people as well. I think so. The people are feeling triggered, certainly in this country or in Europe, in lots of parts of Europe, where their life is in upheaval, or has had to shift a lot over the past 2 months, really, because of the corona lockdown measures. And for me, that's a well-known path. I know the path of the triggers. I know the path of enforced solitude. That's the core of that path, really, or a core of the dark past. And it's difficult still, it's not something that I deal with like that. It's not a nonchalant type of a thing to deal with ever, really. If I'm being nonchalant about anything, there's parts inside of me that will come and get me later on, definitely, because that's how that goes. I wanted to describe also the whys and the wherefores of the past, of where I come from, so that you can, see what that was like, really. So my parents were both Dutch nationals. My father is still alive. My mother passed away 25 years ago in November. And is that true? Yes, that's true. For a second there, I hesitated about the actual number of years, but it is really a quarter of a century. My parents both had a lot of traumatic baggage in their psychological makeup. They were both also, funnily enough, extraordinarily strong-willed and ambitious people. Only what I've realized quite a long time ago already is that, basically from working with astrology, which is one thing that I started doing out of sheer, confusion and desperation in my relationship with those people, or what was left of it, is that for a person to be ambitious is fine, but you need a lot of personal development and help and education in order to make good that ambition. If people are frustrated in that, and they have all this impetus inside them, all this urging to mess with things, and there is no real strategy in their lives to give a shape to that energy, to that ambition, then bad things will happen. I'm fairly confident that that's something also that's rather common. Depends on the people. Lots of people, myself included, are a lot less ambitious. We're not that motivated to change the face of the earth, to change the world, to be this massive influencer. It's just not a thing. And there is a great difference between the two tribes, the tribe of the people who are like laid back and, enjoy themselves and see what comes, just like me, basically, which is what I think that I am in my basic nature. And the other tribe of people who can't see how you can just sit there and not be, not be a fanatic, really. So there's very different, very opposing perspectives right there. I learned to see that my parents were like that. I experienced from the get go that my mother, in particular, had a lot of ambition in her and a lot of personal, I don't know, drive to be principled. And she was very, very, what we in Dutch call a straight line person. Rechtlijnig. Like there's one principle, it's also rather black and white. And, she used to always have to, stick to her principle. And once she made out that's the principle, then that's how it's got to be. And very strong-willed. She was a Taurus. And my rescue, one of the big helping ideas for me was when I got in touch with astrology, I found out that my parents actually, had a combination in their birth charts that I do not have, which explains how it is that they are so the way they are and how I'm not, So that's been like a massive eye-opener and a huge relief for me and a huge connection to the field of astrology for the rest of my life also, because it just made so much more sense. Things that I've experienced where my mother would try to get me to behave in a certain way or would try to make me see things where I just couldn't be bothered that much, I was also a different generation, of course, and all that has created a lot of misunderstandings between her and me. The other thing that I have to point out here at this point is that both my parents carried huge trauma with them from the Second World War and from other parts of their personal history, that basically I have one of the huge other, comparable to understanding a bit more through astrology, I can also understand other behavior aspects of them versus myself. Is the thing that helps me to understand is that people didn't used to talk about things that bothered them as much as we do nowadays, as much as I naturally do already, as much as I am doing right here. My mother was really how can I put this? A descendant of a family of people who were almost specialized, all of them, in silence, in the silent treatment as an everyday go-to state of affairs right there. So they bottled everything up. Many of them were Taurus sun sign people also. So it's a kind of I've got this assumption that many Taurus naturals are Taurus sun sign people, have a tendency to, be silent, be quiet, and just, go about their business and continue as is without, going into any sorts of lengths to discuss things or to engage in communication at all, ever. My mother was one like that, very much. So she loved to talk if somebody else started it up, if somebody else, she could be very chatty, and I've had lots of nice conversations with her, which I certainly should, also remember at this point. It wasn't all very negative, but I think I came into the world with an assumption that everybody was going to love me and like me, and they did often. And then there is this whole huge wall of silence built around that, which contained very many bad memories of other people And I grew up like feeling like there was a curse on our family. Basically, that's one way of putting it. I'm needing to pull in images that aren't really from my own past to sort of give you a sense of what it is that happened, right? We practically moved house endlessly. So I was born in the Netherlands, but we moved to Mogadishu in Somalia in immediately afterwards, so a couple of months after I was born in '66, and we stayed there for 1 year. After that, the relationship between my parents started to deteriorate really badly, and I'm thinking that my mother's silent attitude was certainly a part of that. And yeah, so I can go into all sorts of details about that, but that's not really the point of my video here. I don't want to make an endless list of all the details and things. I'm hoping that that's not what I'm doing. We moved. I was confronted in the years afterwards not only with a disintegrating family situation at home, with its attendant bits of fight and violence. Even my father wasn't necessarily a very violent person physically, I think, as far as I'm able to remember. He had problems of his own, and he was frustrated, and the fact that my mother didn't talk back to him didn't help. It made everything a lot worse. And if she'd been able to snap him out of it, and say, this is enough, let's just not do this anymore, and be her own, be more in control. But that was impossible for her because of all sorts of other, background things. She had been in just in a tiny nutshell there. I don't want to talk about them too much detail or spend too much time on the past, but it's relevant. She had been in a concentration camp in Indonesia as a child for 4 years with her mother, and they had not seen their father and older brother for that whole period of time, I think. So that was really hard. They came from a situation as colonists. My grandfather was a teacher at lower and middle school before the war, and they were really comfortable. It was a very controlled situation. Both of the grandparents had an attitude in life that was, all about order, control, and to a large extent that worked for them. And then the camps and the war was, of course, the complete disintegration of all that structure. There was less actual real life control or order than met the eye, I think, in reality, because my grandfather abused his daughter in the sense that he beat her when she was naughty. So using a belt, even. I have no clue how somebody can use a belt on a 5-year-old girl. That makes no sense to me. But the only way that I've managed to explain that to myself is by looking at old photographs, where I even have a couple of old photographs from that period and from a younger period of time, where I can see in my grandfather as a boy, as a 5-year-old boy or 4-year-old or so, I don't know exactly how old he is at that time, that he is afraid also. So I have plenty reasons to basically come to the conclusion that he was beaten in the same way as he was when he was a little child. And of course, nobody ever talked about any of this. So his mother, that of course I never knew personally, was a very, I think, a very lonely and very a person who felt completely abandoned, because the father of her children left her around, when was that? So around 1915 or so. So that's going really far back. But it's relevant. It's all relevant because there's a huge pattern in that part of the family of my grandfather being against virulently, without words, against divorce. So my mother tried to deal with my dad and his weirdness and his complete, other completely different wavelengths and completely different problems by coping and coping and coping silently as much as she could until she could no more. And my dad, on his side, experienced persecution during the war from the Jewish perspective. So they were in Amsterdam back then, and a part of his family, he saw a part of his family being taken away to the concentration camps in Germany. So I have both the histories, right, as I sit here, they're still present, they're still here. And the weird thing is that there's probably just no way of preparing a child for any of this. I certainly wasn't able to deal with the why and how it was supposed to make sense, because at what age would you have started talking about those things? My mother tried to inform me, tried to tell me what was, why she did things. She tried to be rational and try to explain things and so on and so forth. We moved house endlessly. After Somalia, we came back to the Netherlands for a short while. Then my father got a job in Geneva, Switzerland, which is where my first real memories come from. We stayed there for, in total, probably 3 or 4 years. And some of my memories are really good, really pretty. Beautiful mountains, lake in the sun, beautiful city. Geneva is beautiful. And I started, I think, becoming aware of the huge contrast between the atmosphere outside, nature, the mountains, the way that looks. There's no site in the world, perhaps maybe the Mount Everest, something like that, comparable to Mont Blanc in the sun, looking at it from the other side of the lake. That's just glorious. So there's that. And then there was all the tensions and all the bad things going on in the house that I was really scared. My mother was really worried about me. That's one other theme that's sort of stuck with me immensely in my own psychological makeup. She has not beaten me very often. It happened a few times. She did not use a belt, she used her hand. But I was terrified of her anyway. She did that at times where she was terrified that I had disappeared, really, and that she was enormously protective of me, and in a sense really clingy to me. And I, of course, as a 4 or 5-year-old, I wanted to go out and explore, so that those tendencies were really very counterproductive to each other, so to speak. So I got really scared, and I got really, I had to, basically deal with the way she behaved. She was often very silent to me as well, grumpy and inaccessible. She wasn't really it's the weird thing is that she was, on the one hand, as supportive and protective and nourishing in a way as a mother can be, I think, but it didn't come out in a way that was easy to work with for me. So after Geneva, we came back to the Netherlands again, and long story short, there's another lot of moves there. I had to even stay at a foster home for 5 months or so, which is also something that happens to lots of people. And I never really realized, because one aspect of moving house so many times is that you grow up without any sense of things happening to you that happen to other people as well. There's no sense of things shared ever. That's a very crucial part of who I am as I sit here still. I don't realize that whatever it is that I'm saying at this moment, I do because I'm thinking of it. I'm trying to, make sense to you people. It's not native to me. It's native to me to just go about my business blindly, endlessly, keep myself, busy and occupied. And it's still also quite hard often. So, in the foster home, I was looked after, I was taken care of. I was 7 years old at the time. I was in a great state of confusion as to why my parents were gone out of my life all of a sudden. I had lots of turmoil inside. I enjoyed the fact that my life was a lot quieter and a lot more structured all of a sudden. They, in that foster family, who were friends of my grandfather's on my dad's side, they actually gave me what I really needed, much more. But I, of course, had no clue, and I had I suppose I had loyalty issues with people. I wasn't even aware of that because I was kind of what I see now as underdeveloped. I hadn't really ever gotten a chance to become a person who could say, look, this is all very nice, but I should be more connected to my real parents as well. So very common, this type of stuff happens in broken families, doesn't it? I got kidnapped from the school I went to at the end of that 5-month period by my mother, who had managed to find a friend who had a car, and she picked me up at noontime, at lunchtime, from the school at a moment where I was supposed to actually, go have lunch with a little friend of mine, just by that school close by. And it's only last year or in 2018, I think, that I managed to track down and contact my foster mother and speak to her. She was 90 years old when she passed away last year. So yeah, it was at the end of 2018 that I actually got to talk to her. It was amazing, to the extent that I actually even remember bits. Yeah, I remember bits about that period. There were positive bits. She was a nice person. She tried to be really friendly. She tried to help me. She also tried to claim me from, she resented the fact that I got taken away from her again. So another person who tried to own my ass. Oh, you guys. All this has controlled and directed the way I feel, the way I behave, the way I think all the time. My mother showed up with that friend of hers in this green Dodge 70s automobile, Citroen. And they shoved me into the car, and all I could think at that point was, oh no, not her again. So here I am on the internet, giving it to you as it was. After that, my mother managed to, I don't know what the word is, officially adopt me again. I was assigned to her single household by then. So that was okay. That was legal. That took some doing, but it was seen to in the end. And my dad was out of the picture. I have seen my dad a few times during that period, but he didn't really connect with me personally either because it was all too complicated for him as well. It's still too complicated. I spoke to him too in 2019 for a period of time in the end of the autumn. There's videos on my channel about that period, and I shut it down again because it turned out that I understand a lot more now because of those talks. And to my dad, I could to some extent talk in the sense that he's much more verbal and he doesn't have the silent treatment thing going on in his family, what with, I'm assuming here, Jewish heritage, which makes verbal communication a lot more fluent and a lot easier, a lot more necessary also, a lot more artistic. In lots of ways, I inherited many interesting qualities to me, and productive and useful qualities from his side of the family. I inherited, I think, productive qualities from both sides, really, because on my mum's side, most of them were school teachers, and I had, I had interesting ways. I learned grammar and things like that. I learned to learn things. I had a school teachery kind of a vibe in my life that was present, certainly also from my granddad, who was the only other relative in my family that I grew up with on and off, during the years when when I could actually see him, or he came to see us. We moved house again and again and again and yet again in during the period of time until I was 18 years old. Part of which, the larger part of that, from my 12 to 18 period, that period, I spent abroad so not in the Netherlands anymore. At first, I lived with my mother in Spain for 1 year, in the south of Spain, in Andalusia, for a year. Learned Spanish and, got along with people as best I could. And there were all sorts of things in Spain that I liked a lot, so I wouldn't mind staying there at all. But it wasn't to be. We moved to the east part of France, the Alsace part, which is close to the German border. After that, and I had 2 really interesting years over there. I still come back to that part of France because I like being there. It's a very comfortable place for me to be. More and more so, I think, in the years, I see it as a kind of a home, in a way, to the extent that's actually a thing for me, because I was uprooted again and again and again. I didn't get to connect with people that much, and it took me an age and a half to realize that was actually a problem, that I didn't really, I didn't have there's lots of synapses that are in your human nature where you are supposed to connect, right? And they were very either underdeveloped or, all sorts of weird things. After the Alsace region, we moved to, when I was 15, to the south of France, which was also a really nice region to live, and it was beautiful, lots of beautiful nature and things that I could connect with in that sense. Yes, I suppose I was kind of growing up in a bit, in ways, but I still didn't connect. I still didn't, I didn't do any connecting to anybody ever. And as far as my mum was concerned, she was fine with that, which is a really cruel thing to say at this point, I think, but it was the truth. I decided to go and study English literature or English language at first, and that's where, in Amsterdam. So I moved away from my mother for the first time. I think now, looking back, that period of leaving my mother for the first time was hard on both of us, and I certainly was picking up over the 1,000 kilometers between us at that stage, me being in Amsterdam and she still being in the south of France, or wherever she went after that. She moved around a lot more. In that period, I was aware of a great, overwhelming sadness. And I remember staring outside, staring out the window of my room at my granddad's apartment, where I stayed with him for 3 years, and crying because I felt completely lost and I had no idea. During the day at the university, it was fine. I was doing rather well, I think. In the first couple of years, my granddad was also quite a support at that time for my studies, for me getting my studies done, keeping reading and studying and writing and doing the papers and all the rest of it. It's a support, and the studying is by itself is a support, right, for you, for your life. It helps you give structure. It organizes your life for you in lots of ways. Then, a couple of years in, I think 2.5 years in or so, I met my husband, and I connected with him on a very deep, very strong personal level. something I'd never experienced before in my life, and neither had he. So I was 21 at the time, and we decided fairly quickly after we had, actually become a couple, we decided that we wanted to get married, or I decided that I thought that getting married was a good idea because I wanted to make it very clear and very obvious to everybody that this man was mine and that I wasn't going to, I was going to stick with him and he was going to stick with me. He was fine with my making that decision for him in a way. And we stayed in Amsterdam for a couple more years in his teeny tiny minuscule apartment that he had. And I found that it was really hard to combine my studies that I hadn't completed yet with life with him in a way. So that was obviously something that everybody was really scared of. You're not going to start to finish your studies. When you married, my mother was in total opposition to the whole thing. I don't think she ever really accepted his presence in my life anyway. Obviously, makes a lot of sense looking in hindsight, at this whole sorry tale here. Having said all that, we moved to this part of the world, which is about 100 and a bit kilometers away from Amsterdam, down south in the Netherlands, which is where my husband grew up to a large extent. He is also a child of divorced parents, and many people, and many, certainly both of us as well, at the time were rather insecure about how successful we were going to be as a married couple with all our past problems and traumas and travails, because he's got a completely different and also fairly complicated set of issues that he brought with him. In the total at this point, 34 almost years on in time, I can say that we did do the thing. We did manage. We have met each and every one of our challenges, both of us separately and together, always, again and again, as life, developed. And we've had still always we had more joy together than we had problems. So it wasn't that the problems that we carried with us and the issues that we had and the behavioral stuff, and we were very accepting of each other, accepting of each other's difficulties and of each other as we are, both ways. And that's the big secret, of course. So moving on from there, I in the part of the country, in Brabant, where we are now, we settled in another town away from here. I started doing volunteer work. My granddad passed away in 1995. My mother passed away quickly after that. I had a hard time before that happened because of all sorts of issues. 95 was a damnation horrible year. It was, sorry for the word, it was a bad year in all sorts of ways. I tried to help my mother to move her stuff out of the house. It was a house moving carousel all that summer. So July and August I spent doing nothing but packing stuff and cleaning stuff out in my own house because we moved. And then my mom had to move from the south of France, from the place that she lived in at that time, and so on and so forth. And then at the end of November, she finally passed away. She had been suffering from basically intestinal cramps and probably some type of a parasite that she had picked up. She had a very, very weak immune system. So if I have health obsession issues, it's because of growing up with a person who had always had health issues and things that she couldn't do. I grew up with a person who had all this power and all this ambition and all this willpower, but no real life, no work, no friends, no activities. She was actually personally really depressed a lot of the time, which is understandable. But it's not healthy for a person to grow up with, right? So I learned lots of things, but there's also a large thing that you carry around with you, a charge, a heaviness of not knowing the simplest things, how to go about with people, doing things and all that. So I started doing volunteer work. Okay, from that I actually got into a job where I became a sales representative for an incense company, where I worked for 11 years in total. That was a group of people who were all in one way or another capable of great things, but also flawed and tainted in many ways. And so that was the first half of that period was good and productive and interesting. And then after that, the things became more difficult between us. And it turned out that we didn't understand each other as well as we thought we did, both ways. And I have to, be a bit careful about how I say this. But my husband and I were in a company of our own. We were independent. What do you call that? Business people. We owned our own business, and that failed. So we went bankrupt in 2012, and I had to quit my incense work at the end of that year, which is how I came to live with my husband in this house in 2013, very early, in actually December 12, we moved into this house. We had to sell the house that we owned before that, or that the bank owned for us, right? Because we just couldn't manage. There was an economic crisis going on. I didn't sell the level of products that I used to sell back in 2001 and 2 and 3. Those were the good days. And after that, sales just went down badly, and we couldn't manage anymore. All the time that I was working, I was running to keep up with things, and I had no time to think. I had no time to put things in perspective, either personally. The story that I am telling you now, I could have told you back then, but I had the sense of connecting to people and being a part of humanity. That came to me afterwards, after 2013, right there. So there's lots more that I could talk to you about, which I won't do now because I'm already 3/4 of an hour in, dear Lord. I had, the one thing that I will mention at this point is I had an interesting experience after that, which I can only sum up as a soul retrieval experience. And that sort of stands separate from all the psychological turmoil and all the other, things where I was basically just a pawn in somebody else's game, always. I transformed through the soul retrieval experiences, plural. I transformed into becoming my own chess piece. I am my own, like to think of myself as a Knight of Wands. Yes, very much. Which is like a 180 complete transformation in my life. I am an agent now. I am capable of making choices. I'm capable of connecting to people, which is why I'm on YouTube. All that took a lot of doing, and about the details of the process, I have made several videos. I've also thought in the recent past that I should revisit the whole soul retrieval experience from all sorts of perspectives, because it's interesting and nobody really talks about this stuff. But not right now, because then that will be too much. Life has transformed from all the, and it's still hard. There's still days where I don't know how to do this, but there are many more moments where I am aware that what used to be insurmountable difficulties, or generally a state of being completely paralyzed and incapacitated, has actually, in this state of affairs, now on the other side of the soul retrieval, all those aspects have become tools and points of learning, and points of gaining insight into different levels, deeper levels that I would never have had if life hadn't been so crazy. So that's always a good conclusion to come to, right? That I wouldn't say so far, because that's of course the other side of that. If you go through a shortcut, you tend to say, was it all worth it? That's a ridiculous kind of a question to ask, because that's not only my process that would be part of that equation. It's my parents' process and their parents and all that. And I can't speak for them because they do not get the benefit. My mother does not get the benefit of my soul retrieval. And I don't think it would have been possible for me to experience the soul retrieval if she had still been around, which is nasty. And I'm sorry that that's how I have to put this, right? But my life has been transformed. She would be glad. I think she is glad wherever she is now. And to a large extent, she would certainly feel that what with the results coming out at this moment in this period in time, that it was worth working for. Anyway, I'm going to basically leave it at this. I hope this is useful to somebody out there, which is what I always tend to say. I find it interesting that I have basically told you just like a couple of really tiny points, and I'm more than 3/4 of an hour in. Goodness me. That's the backbone of what my life used to be like. I have learned many things, and I'm still I am so much more on top of my life nowadays. And that's great. That's just, if I think about everything, in combination, and I sit and look at how I do things nowadays, I suppose I could say I'm proud of myself because I did this. I got me here. I got us here because I helped husband as well. And we are so much better off nowadays. So that's a good point for a conclusion. Thank you for watching. If you got this far, thank you so much. And I will be, I will be back soon enough. Okay? Be well and see you soon. Okay? Ciao.